She didn't come back for him. She came for a signature, and she came alone, because showing up to a Miami syndicate compound with backup was how you ended up in the Bay. The cab driver took the causeway exit without being asked. Everyone in the city knew which gate sat at the end of Seagate Drive, the compound that occupied the entire northern tip of the island, white limestone walls running the length of a city block, bougainvillea draped over the top like a decorator's afterthought. Beautiful, if you didn't know what the walls were built to keep out. Vera paid the fare in cash. She tipped 20% because she always did. Even when she couldn't afford to, she stepped out into the August heat, and the air hit her like a wet blanket, thick and salt-heavy off the bay. Her linen jacket, oversized, deliberately chosen, stuck to the back of her arms before she'd taken 5 steps. 7 months. She'd spent 7 months in a one-room apartment in Savannah, eating cereal for dinner and bargaining with her own conscience about whether she was brave or just stupid for waiting this long. The answer hadn't changed. She was both. She'd always been both. She rested her hand against the swell of her stomach without thinking about it. 7 months and 1 week, to be exact. She was a numbers woman. She knew her counts down to the day. The guard at the gatehouse stepped out before she reached the intercom. Young, broad-shouldered, already reaching toward the lapel of his jacket, with the automatic reflex of a man who'd spent too long in environments where reaching first was the only rule that mattered. "Private property," he said, then his eyes dropped. His hand fell away from his jacket. "I need to see Beckett," Vera said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was the one piece of luck she'd had all morning. "Tell him it's Vera Callum. Tell him I have the Alderman Street ledgers." The guard didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Then he turned away and pressed 2 fingers to his earpiece, speaking in a low, urgent murmur. The Alderman Street ledgers were the kind of thing that made men in this organization move fast and ask questions later. That had been the plan. The gate opened. She walked the long curve of the driveway under a canopy of royal palms. The compound's main house rose ahead of her, 3 stories of pale limestone and dark glass overlooking the water. She had worked in that house for 2.5 years. She had sat at the desk in the 3rd-floor office and reconciled accounts that never appeared on any tax filing. She had balanced the numbers for a man whose entire empire ran on a kind of brutal, meticulous precision. She had once found quietly impressive before she understood the full weight of what she was balancing. Whitmore was waiting on the front steps. He was 61 years old, built like a man who'd been cut from a block of teak, with close-cropped silver hair and eyes that had never once softened in the 2.5 years Vera had known him. He had killed people with the same quiet efficiency with which he organized Beckett's calendar. He looked at her. The efficiency fell off his face like a dropped mask. "Callie," said, not a greeting. The word came out like a man stepping on a nail. "Whitmore." She climbed the steps carefully. The heat pressed down on her. The baby was sitting low today, and every step sent a dull pulse of pressure through her pelvis. "Is he upstairs?" Whitmore's eyes traveled from her face to her midsection and back to her face. His jaw worked once. A man calculating something he didn't have the variables for. "He's in the main office." Whitmore stepped aside, but his voice dropped when she passed him. "Vera, he doesn't know." "That's the point," she said. She didn't break stride. The interior of the house was cool and faintly dark. The air conditioning running at the Arctic setting Beckett kept it at year-round, the kind of cold that felt aggressive after the Miami heat. The house smelled of sea salt, polished concrete, and the faint, mineral undertone of money, not the decorative kind, but the kind that had been earned through decisions most people couldn't live with. Vera had once been comfortable in this house. She thought about that as she walked the hallway toward the main office on the 2nd floor, her fingers trailing along the wall for balance she didn't want to admit she needed. She had eaten dinner at the long dining table. She had argued with Beckett over a bourbon about the inefficiency of his tax shelter structure. She had, briefly and stupidly, believed that being useful to a man like him was a form of safety. She found out exactly how wrong she was the night his rivals drove a car bomb into the Alderman Street warehouse. The night Beckett came home with glass in his hair and a controlled, terrible calmness on his face, and told her the city was going to get bloody and she should pack a bag and stay at the secondary property in Coral Gables until it was over. She had found out she was pregnant 3 days before that. She hadn't packed a bag for Coral Gables. The door to the main office was heavy frosted glass over a steel frame. She didn't knock. She pushed it open. Beckett was standing at the window with his back to the room, looking out at the water. He was in his shirt sleeves, white, pressed, rolled twice to the forearm, and he had a phone pressed to his ear, speaking in the low, flat cadence he used when someone was getting one warning before consequences arrived. "I said Thursday," he said into the phone. "Not Friday, not the weekend, Thursday." A pause. "No, we don't renegotiate the terms because you had a scheduling conflict." He ended the call. He heard her. She knew he heard her. Beckett heard everything in a room he was standing in, but he didn't turn around immediately. He stood for a moment looking at the bay, his shoulders impossibly still. Then he turned. The file she was holding slipped from her fingers. She caught it before it hit the ground, which was fortunate. Because in the 3 seconds it took her to straighten, she watched Beckett's face go through something she had never seen it do in 2.5 years. It went blank. Not the controlled blank he wore in negotiations. Not the deliberate emptiness he deployed in meetings when he wanted people to feel the pressure of his silence. This was different. This was a man whose processing power had simply stopped, the way a circuit does when the current spikes above what it was built to carry. His eyes moved from her face to her stomach, back to her face. His phone dropped onto the desk behind him. He didn't seem to notice. "Beckett," she said. Her voice was still steady. She was almost impressed with herself. "I need 15 minutes of your time and a signature on the documentation in this file. My lawyer confirmed the termination of employment can be finalized today if you sign the severance release on pages 3 and 7. After that, I walk out, and neither of us ever has to acknowledge the other exists again." He didn't say anything. He crossed the room. He stopped 18 inches from her, close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago, the slightly more pronounced set of his jaw, the grey that had spread further into the hair at his temples. He looked at her the way he looked at a spreadsheet that wasn't adding up. "How long?" he said. 7 months. Another silence. He was doing the math. She watched him do it, watched the date of her disappearance land against the current date, and the number between them crystallize into something unavoidable. "Mine," he said. It wasn't a question. "Your arithmetic skills are impeccable." She extended the file, page 3 and 7. He didn't take it. He stepped closer. She held her ground because she had learned at 22 that once you start stepping back from a man like Beckett, you never stop. "You've been gone for 7 months, he said quietly. 7 months. I had 3 crews looking for you. I had your accounts frozen, your credit flagged. I had every contact you'd ever made in this city contacted personally." His voice was controlled, just barely. "And you were, where?" "Savannah." "Savannah." He repeated the word like it had personally offended him. "It's a 4-hour drive, not exactly deep cover." She pulled the file back slightly, keeping it between them. "Sign the papers, Beckett, then I'll go." "You're not going anywhere." The words came out without inflection, which was how she knew he meant them absolutely. He reached out and took the file from her hand, not roughly, just firmly, the way he took everything, and set it on the nearest surface without looking at it. "Sit down." "I don't want to sit down." "Vera." His jaw tightened. "You look like you haven't slept in 3 days. Your blood pressure is probably through the floor, and you're 8 seconds from your knees locking up. Sit down." She hated that he was right. She sat in the chair nearest the window, because it was either that or prove him right by actually going down. The relief on her spine was immediate and involuntary. Beckett crouched in front of her. It was a startling thing to see, A man who never made himself smaller than anyone in any room, down on one knee in front of her, his dark eyes level with hers. "Tell me why you left," he said. "I left because—" the real reason. She looked at him, at the scar along his left jaw she had once, in a moment of profound lapse in judgment, pressed her thumb against while he was sleeping, at the expression he was wearing now, which was the closest thing to unguarded she had ever seen on his face. "The night you came home with glass in your hair," she said. "The Alderman Street bomb. Do you remember what you told me?" "I told you to go to Coral Gables. You told me the city was going to get bloody. You told me you had 4 active contracts on your name, and it was going to get worse before it got better." She watched his face. "I found out I was pregnant 2 days before that. I was going to tell you. I had the whole thing planned. This conversation, what I'd say, how I'd say it. And then you came home with glass in your hair and blood on your cuffs that wasn't once yours. And you sat on the edge of the couch and told me you weren't sure any of your locations were clean anymore." The silence in the room stretched. "If your rivals found out I was carrying your child," Vera said, "I don't become collateral, Beckett. I become the headline. We both know that." She looked down at her hands. "I couldn't gamble a baby's life on the odds that you'd finish the war fast enough. The math didn't work, so I changed the variables." He was quiet for a long time. "The Gaza crew is gone," he said finally. "Finished 8 weeks ago. The city's been clean since June." She closed her eyes. 8 weeks. She had been counting out cereal in a Savannah kitchenette for 8 more weeks than she needed to. "The papers, Beckett," she said, her voice finally losing some of its flatness. "I ran out of money. My lawyer said I had to appear in person to finalize the employment termination before I can access the account the firm set up for me. I'm not here for anything else. I'm not asking you to." She stopped, started again. "I just need the signature." He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there looking at the bay with his hands in his pockets, doing whatever it was Beckett did when he was deciding something, and making it look like thinking. Then he picked up the file. He looked at it for a long moment, and he tore it in half. "Beckett." "No." He dropped the pieces. "You are not walking back out of this building on a severance package and a handshake. You've been living on what? Savings? A credit line. 7 months pregnant and rationing groceries in Savannah because you were protecting." He stopped, turned to face her. "Because you were protecting my child." She said nothing. He crossed the room again. He stopped in front of her. He reached out with both hands and placed them, very carefully, on either side of her stomach. She should have pushed him away. She intended to push him away. Instead, she just sat there while his hands found the curve of her, and his expression did something she didn't have language for, broke open, just slightly, at the seams. Something moved under his left palm. A sharp, sudden kick, a heel connecting with the inside of her ribs, the baby registering its feelings about the situation with characteristic directness. Beckett's breath stopped. He looked up at her. For the first time in 2.5 years, Vera saw something in his eyes that wasn't controlled or calculated or cold. He couldn't finish the sentence. "Yes," she said. Her voice had gone rough. She hadn't meant for it to. "How often does she do that?" "Constantly, and we don't know it's a girl." "I know," he said, with the same certainty he applied to market projections and threat assessments. She would have argued with him about it if her throat hadn't been doing the thing it did now when she was trying not to cry, which was embarrassing and inconvenient, and almost entirely his fault. He called for Whitmore. He gave instructions in that clipped, absolute shorthand he used with his people. "Get the East Room ready. Get Dr. Science here within the hour. No outside calls without verification." Whitmore stood in the doorway and absorbed all of it with the expression of a man who had decided not to process his feelings until he was alone. Before he left, Whitmore's eyes found Vera's. He gave her the smallest possible nod. It might have been welcome back. With Whitmore, you never knew. The doctor came at 4 in the afternoon, a compact, efficient woman who had clearly seen things in Beckett's employ that had rendered her impossible to rattle. She set up the portable ultrasound with the practiced speed of someone who had stopped asking where the nearest hospital was years ago. Beckett stood at the edge of the room while Sayens ran the wand across Vera's stomach. He had changed into a dark Henley and slacks, and he stood with his arms at his sides in the careful, deliberate stillness of a man who had a great deal to say, and had decided not to say it yet. The screen filled with static that sharpened into a curve, a spine, a rib cage, the tiny moon-shaped profile of a face with its eyes closed and one thumb tucked against its cheek. Vera heard Beckett's breathing change from across the room. Then the sound came, the heartbeat, fast and rhythmic and completely sure of itself, filling the quiet room like something that had no business existing in a place like this and was entirely indifferent to that fact. Beckett moved to her side without appearing to decide to do it. "Heart rate is strong," Sayens said. "Very strong. Measurements look consistent with 30 weeks. Position is fine." She looked up at Beckett, not Vera, which said everything about how the chain of command in this room had been established. "Mother is slightly undernourished. I want to start iron supplementation tonight and get some weight on her before we get any further along. She needs rest. Minimum activity. No stress. She eats every 3 hours whether she's hungry or not." "Understood," Beckett said. He reached out and placed 2 fingers against the side of Vera's stomach, just above where Sayens was holding the wand. Very lightly. Like a man approaching something he wasn't sure he was allowed to touch. The baby kicked directly against his fingers. Beckett made a sound in the back of his throat she had never heard him make before. It wasn't a word. It was the sound of a man who had spent his entire adult life being the most dangerous thing in any room he walked into, being thoroughly, completely undone by 4 ounces of person. The doctor left supplements and 3 typed pages of dietary instructions and departed without ceremony. The room went quiet. Beckett sat on the edge of the chair beside the bed. "She said no stress," Vera said. I heard her. Tearing my paperwork in half was stressful. "I'll have new ones drafted." He set the instruction pages down. "After you've slept and eaten." He stopped himself. His jaw worked once. "I had men looking for you for 5 months, Vera. 5 months. And then I stopped because Whitmore told me if you'd gone this long without surfacing, you'd gone because you wanted to. And I had to decide whether to believe that or—" He didn't finish. "Or act like a syndicate boss about it," she said. "Yes." She looked at the ceiling. The room was cool and larger than her entire Savannah apartment, and the mattress beneath her was the first good mattress she'd slept on since February, and she was so tired she was starting to lose track of which parts of her exhaustion were physical and which were the other kind. "I didn't want to go," she said. "I want you to know that, whatever happens from here, that's on the record." He was quiet for a moment. "Noted," he said. It happened at 11 that night. Vera heard it before she understood what it was, a low concussive crack, distant but heavy enough to rattle the windows of the east bedroom, followed by the immediate eruption of shouting from the outer grounds. She was upright before she was fully awake, her body operating on the instinct it had developed over 2 years of living adjacent to men like the ones Beckett kept around him. Whitmore appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later, already armed, already moving. "Vehicles at the south wall," he said. 3 of them. It's a breach." His eyes found Vera's and went flat and certain. "We're going to the lower room right now. Can you walk?" She was already out of bed. The house was chaos in the way that well-organized houses become when they go wrong all at once. Doors slamming, boots on concrete, the sharp radio shorthand of men trying to coordinate something they hadn't expected to coordinate tonight. Vera counted exits as she moved because she always counted exits. It was the first thing Beckett had ever taught her about living in his world. Beckett wasn't in the house. Beckett had left at 9 with half his crew on what Whitmore had called a routine supply line confirmation, which meant he'd been drawn out. The understanding hit her like cold water. She grabbed Whitmore's arm as they moved down the back staircase. "It's a diversion," she said. They drew him out first. Whitmore's face didn't change. "I know. I called him 7 minutes ago. He's coming back." He steered her through the kitchen, through the butler's pantry, to the locked door at the back of the lower hall, his hand on the biometric pad, a long, grinding mechanical sound as the bolts retracted. "Get inside. Lock it from the inside. Don't open it for anyone but Beckett." Whitmore. "He'll make it back." He said it simply, the way he said all things as fact. "Lock the door, Vera." She went inside. She locked the door. The panic room was built into the foundation of the house, 10 feet of reinforced concrete on every side, a ventilation system with its own independent generator, supplies for 10 days. Vera had inventoried this room twice during her 2 years in Beckett's employ and had hoped she would never see it from the inside. She found the cot in the corner. She sat down. She counted her breathing. Outside, through the concrete, she could hear something. The muffled, continuous percussion of a firefight that was not going away. It went on for 8 minutes. She counted those too. Then it stopped. The silence was worse. She pressed her palm to her stomach. The baby was awake, active, reacting to the adrenaline with the same urgency its father would have brought to the situation. "I know," Vera said quietly. "Just wait." The pain started at the 40-minute mark. It came from low in her back first, a deep grinding pressure she had felt before, but never this sharp, never this consistent. She counted the intervals because she had been counting things her whole life, as a way of controlling the parts of the world that otherwise refused to cooperate. 3 minutes apart. She was 7 weeks early. She was alone in a concrete room. She was on her feet and pacing the 15-foot length of the space before she'd made a conscious decision to stand, her body doing what it needed to do without consulting her. The knock on the vault door came at the 50-minute mark. Not the knock of someone trying to breach it, the knock of a single fist, deliberate and heavy, 3 times. Then her name, muffled through 8 inches of steel, but unmistakable. She crossed the room and hit the release. The door opened. Beckett was standing in the doorway. His shirt was in pieces. There was blood on his jaw from a cut near his cheekbone, and ash on his hands, and the look on his face of a man who had been running and fighting for 50 minutes straight with a single objective. When he saw her standing upright, the expression cracked. "You're all right," he said. "I'm in labor," she said. The expression changed again. He was inside the room in 2 strides, his hands on her face, checking her pupils, her coloring, running the same rapid assessment he applied to everything. How far apart? 3 minutes when I last checked, maybe closer now. He pulled his phone. Sayen's is 12 minutes out. Beckett. She grabbed his wrist. She looked at him. He looked at her. She's not going to make it in 12 minutes. He put the phone away. He took off the ruined shirt. He helped her to the cot. He washed his hands at the utility sink in the corner with the same methodical focus he brought to every problem he had ever decided to solve, and then he came back and positioned himself where he needed to be, and he said in the steadiest voice she had ever heard him use, "I'm here, look at me." She looked at him. Through all of it, the pain that arrived in waves, like something trying to take her apart to see how she was made, the fear that lived underneath the pain and refused to be quiet, the terrible exposed vulnerability of being seen this clearly by a man she had spent 2 years keeping at arm's length. Through all of it, he was the only thing in the room that didn't move. Again, he said when the moment came, "One more, you have it." She gave him one more. And then there was another voice in the room, new and loud and furious, announcing its arrival with no particular interest in the circumstances it had been born into. And Beckett was making a sound she had never once heard from him, something wrecked and soft and entirely real, and he was saying, "Vera, look." She looked. He was holding a daughter. She was red and screaming, and approximately the most opinionated-looking infant Vera had ever seen in her life, which was the only evidence she needed that the girl had taken after exactly one of her parents. Beckett's hands were shaking. She noticed it even through the blur of her own exhaustion. The man who made the calmest calls in the most dangerous rooms in Miami was shaking as he wrapped the baby in the clean cloth he'd found in the supply crates, his movements enormous and careful and completely lost. He laid her on Vera's chest. Vera didn't have words. She pressed her lips to her daughter's head and felt the fine, damp weight of her and understood for the first time what she had actually been protecting in that Savannah apartment, eating cereal and watching the door every night for 7 months. Not an idea, not a plan. This specific, screaming, indignant girl who had just arrived on her own terms in a concrete room in the basement of a crime lord's compound and had clearly already decided she had no complaints about it. Beckett sat beside her on the narrow cot. He put his arm around her, supporting her back, and he looked down at the baby with an expression she didn't have a name for and didn't try to find one. "She has your mouth," he said. "She has your attitude." A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh, abbreviated and rough. He pressed his forehead against her temple. He smelled like smoke and copper and the ocean, and beneath all of that, like himself. Like the office and the bay and the 2.5 years they had spent occupying the same dangerous orbit around each other, without either of them admitting what that meant. "You're not leaving," he said, quietly. "Not a command, something else." She looked at her daughter. She thought about the Savannah apartment with the water stain on the ceiling, and the lock she'd replaced herself the first week. She thought about 7 months of math. The money, the time, the risk calculations that kept shifting the longer she ran them. "I'm not leaving," she said. "It came out easier than she expected, but I want a real role in the accounts, not the version where I balance what you tell me to balance. All of it, Beckett. Full visibility." He was quiet for a moment. "That's your condition." "That's my condition. You want full financial oversight of a criminal enterprise as the price of staying." "I want to know what I'm actually raising her in the middle of." She looked up at him. "Numbers don't scare me, surprises do." He held her gaze long enough that she could see him actually considering it, which with Beckett was not a small thing. He did not offer people visibility into his operations. He did not negotiate terms with anyone who wasn't sitting across from him with leverage. She was sitting beside him in the wreckage of her own plan with his daughter on her chest, and 7 months of terrified, stubborn love between them, and apparently that was leverage enough. "Full visibility," he said. "Full visibility," she confirmed. The baby made a sharp, imperative sound against her chest, registering her opinion on the pace of adult conversations, and Vera felt Beckett's arm tighten around her, not like a man staking a claim, but like a man who had just been handed something he hadn't believed he'd ever hold and was afraid, for the very first time in his life, of dropping it. Outside, somewhere above them, the compound settled back into silence. The war was over. The numbers, for once in Vera's life, were adding up to something she hadn't budgeted for, and she was too exhausted and too relieved and too far past running to argue with the math.